So what I'm hoping to cover today in this brief 15 minutes that we've got is to identify key issues that lie behind recent community struggles. Hopefully provide some fresh insight into how local water spaces are appropriated by dominant interests and contested by others. We won't be able to dive that deeply into the murky waters of rights, but we'll certainly glide across them. And finally, highlighting the complexities associated with access to water. So that's the aim of today. My approach, a couple of years ago, I finished a PhD on the relationship between water and architecture through the eyes of those that lived on the River Thames. And the key themes to emerge from that work were the changing role of the river and its relationship with the city and how this actually impacted on people that lived afloat. Most of the 24 communities that live on the River Thames had actually come into conflict with the authorities in the past 10 or 15 years. So whilst I was writing that up, I forgot to mention access to water was the key problem. And so whilst I was writing that up, COVID was upon us. And of course, I started noticing what was happening through the media in terms of different groups trying to access their local water spaces. I'll come to that in a minute. So in terms of the actual, that was me. In terms of my approach, I relied very heavily on my PhD in terms of the theoretical approach, and that was the politics of water and water space. But I also drew upon the philosopher Henry Lefebvre and looking at the production of space. And that's really interesting because it opens up discussions of power, property, ownership, appropriation of space, how people gain agency and how they're actually able to participate in the production of that space. So in terms of the wider context, the practical context, what we had was the pandemic. We had swimmers were raising awareness of polluting rivers. And I think somebody mentioned before COVID, this wasn't on the agenda at all. And then, of course, we had the grassroots responses, which were beginning to emerge during this time. The Right to Roam, the Outdoor Swimming Society, and as I think as the last speaker said, we're looking at media attention. Everybody's on swimming at the moment. It's a very hot topic, or cold, depending which way you look at it. So, despite the promotion of the health and well-being of swimming, conflicts over water spaces are on the rise, as I'm sure you're all aware. And from a swimmer's perspective, the right to swim in wild and natural spaces and places is complex and open to interpretation. And the Outdoor Swimming Society have a very good discussion on this on their website. And then in terms of access, I also looked at the theory of access, and of course there's multiple meanings. And then in terms of the research gap, people have the experience, but how they've experienced it in terms of conflict, that's what I was looking at. Now, I can't go through all of these because it'll take too long, but basically, the first one to appear during COVID was on the River Cam, and I'm sure you all heard about it. Cambridge University tried to stop them. They did a very fast turnaround in about 2 weeks. But then we had Bristol Harbour, that was also mentioned today. And then we've had other ones, different groups, Speak Up for Rivers, Surfers Against Sewage, but they've also brought up issues of pollution with the help of swimmers and different river spaces. I then documented various campaigns, but it wasn't just campaigns, it was also discussions that were going on. So in 2022, I attended an online conference of the Rivers Trust, and they were talking about whether or not it was safe to swim. The question of bathing water status came up, because somebody also mentioned earlier this morning, really pre-COVID, I think it was there was just one case of bathing water status. That's now sort of gained some momentum, but it's all around discussions for health and well-being. Stories of struggles can shine a light on messy entanglements to reveal how a set of power relations can play out at any one moment or cumulatively over time. Grassroots actions demonstrate how communities embed themselves in space from which they are excluded, thereby exposing how they can challenge dominant perceptions of ownership and/or management. Individually, these cases provide a glimpse into local community clashes with the official narrative of different water spaces and how they may be used and accessed. The different forms of resistance all shine a light on how it's possible to appropriate water space. With determination, it is possible to mount a challenge to participate and negotiate it in the process of production, in this case, water space. Collectively, they bring to the fore the complex nature of access to water. It's not just one thing. An analysis of the swimming struggles highlights issues of legality, water quality, pollution, land, water use, perceptions of public space, planning, affordability, identity, and place connection. I'll just nip back to the methods because I just see I went over that. Sorry about that. So in terms of my methods, so as I've already mentioned, I documented the various conflicts, and that was a way to understand how people, power and place, in this case water, intersect. It was semi-formal interviews with campaigners, politicians, those interested in this particular topic. And so mapping the conflicts is a way into the issues and debates. And in terms of the archival analysis of media articles, my main way of doing that was I was looking at tactics and means of resistance. So what were the campaigns? What were the what were those means of resistance? Were they campaigns, trespasses, petitions, raves, social media? And then I looked at how people actually appropriated those spaces and how they actually then were able to take that forward and negotiated with local authorities. So in the case of Bristol Harbour, for example, how they were able to move that debate on. And of course, in some cases, they haven't been able to at all. So how people, and that's how people embed themselves in the watery spaces. And also the changing role of the post-industrial river and water space. Well, of course, that was very applicable in the case of Bristol and Bristol Harbour, because that is a working harbour. And so there is a changing role there from an industrial to a post-industrial water space. It didn't necessarily apply to rivers, of course, or not all rivers. So I'll go on back again. Now, I'm actually going to talk to you today about one particular case study that took place in Dartmoor National Park last year, which some of you may or may not have heard of. So the Right to Roam were responding to a local landowner who'd recently erected a sign in a car park of a popular recreational location on Dartmoor, banning swimming as well as wild camping. It's a well-known beauty spot for both local and visitors alike, including families picnicking, kayakers and dog waters. Generations of swimmers have swum in this stretch of the Dart, known as Spitchwick Common. It's a part of a privately run family estate, but it's also managed by Dartmoor National Park. It's also one of the few places where people have been able to enjoy unfettered access. Now, I've got to declare an interest here. It's my local swimming spot. And for the last 10 years, in my group, every Sunday morning, this is where we've been swimming. So this appeared in August. We all noticed it, and the aesthetics of it is quite interesting. But anyway, so it's no camping, no wild swimming, please, and no barbecues. So in our swimming group, there was suddenly a huge debate about this trespass was going to happen. The Right to Roam were organising it, as I've already said, And so we, in our swimming group as well, what should we do? Because we all believe in access, but we know the fragility of that particular site. So anyway, we all agreed to go swimming on the Sunday morning. We all got there at 8 o'clock, beautiful, beautiful sunny day. How lucky were we? There was nobody else there at that time, or so we thought. And this is when we arrived at our site, this is what we saw. So this produced, for me, a personal dilemma. This is where the professional meets the personal, and when my heart started beating, what do I do? Because obviously I believe in access, but these are the issues that we're talking about here. Anyway, we all went for a lovely swim. Some of us left, some of us didn't. Some of them joined in, and I left. Although when I got to the car park, the Right to the Roam group were there, The TV was there, etc., etc. Anyway, I went home, the others swim, they all had a nice swim, and it was all great. Oh, let's hope we just float along. Is that something I could... Oh, no, it's that. Anyway, the other problem for me was I had interviewed the landowner the year before, and I knew his perspective. I was also, at that moment in time, involved in a project with anglers on the Dart, and I also knew their perspective. So it was really difficult, and that's why I felt that I couldn't join in the protest. Anyway, afterwards, in an interview with the local organiser, it transpired that the Right to Roam were fully aware of the restrictions and problems at Spitchwick, the site. Although tactically they'd used social media to raise awareness of the forthcoming trespass, it was limited to local groups and allied organisations. The trespass embodied their philosophy to share the countryside with each other and the landowner for the benefit of health and well-being, whilst leaving no trace. The Right to Roam organiser reinforced the campaign's beliefs that the experiences of the natural environment are vital for health and well-being and should not be restricted. Until the signs went up, it was an historic and customary right of access existed. Therefore, the law needed to be changed. The right to swim or otherwise enjoy blue spaces is far less established than legally the right to roam in England due to the issues of land, watercourse and ownership. Just very, very briefly to finish that off, a year later that sign is still there despite the landowner saying he would take it down. Everybody still swims there, so plus ça change really. It's just everything has remained the same. Anyway, an analysis of contemporary conflicts of surrounding water access has exposed legal issues of control and property ownership that are rooted in a legal environment with long historic associations. These conflicts were the subject of a conference organised by the Countryside Recreation Network in 1997. It's quite important to note. But bringing together a range of partners and stakeholders, the aim was to debate the importance of water access in the light of increased demand with climate change and demand pressures. The conference set out the importance of a debate on access to water and how to explain access was deeply entrenched in the law. The conference alluded to the wider political discourse taking place in the time to suggest it would be an opportunity to place access on the political agenda. For this to happen, not only was a consensus, but a political will was needed. 3 years later saw the introduction of the Crow Act. Access to water was missing, despite a warning from the conference that's on these waters that the issue of access challenge awaits. 24 years later, due in part to the pandemic and activism of outdoor swimmers, access to water is finally on the agenda. The mapping of these different conflicts spatially and historically has identified the mechanisms by which it's possible to navigate the challenges and that access to water present. Some swimmers have attempted to claim their right in England's waterways through illegal swims or trespasses. In doing so, they have exposed legal issues of control and property ownership. On the other side of that coin, of course, with rights go responsibilities. I can't go into that now, but there's a whole discussion about if you want rights, that's fine, but how do you then balance that with responsibilities through education, and as we saw with that photo with those camping. Finally, in terms of the themes, in terms of access, so I've briefly alluded today to legal, navigation, pollution, water quality, but access is not any one thing. What's actually come up through the talks today is things, equitable access, gender, age, race, ability, funding, affordability, place connections, memory, history, and sensory perceptions as well. So all access encompasses all of these different things. I'm going to finish with a quote from Elaine Hayes, from the CEO of Plymouth New National Park, when I interviewed her. And its access is about finding a way to navigate the very varied challenges. The key problem is meeting everyone's expectations, from policy to specific details. So opportunities include community engagement led by those who use the space, a theme that's come up today, and listening to others, picking 2 or 3 items that make a difference. You cannot please everybody. So on that note, thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm really interested about it's quite a pedantic one possibly, but it's about access too. So once we're in the water, is that all right? It's just getting to the water that is the access issue. Is that?
It's both. And the whole problem with access is so when I was looking on the Thames, so one body can own the bottom of the land. Somebody else on the Thames could own from the high water tide down to the bottom, and then you could have somebody else who actually owns from the land. So you can have three different types, but of course a lot of the swimmers will say the water's free, which of course it is. It doesn't belong to anybody necessarily, but I have heard riparian owners say, okay, it doesn't actually belong to you, it doesn't actually belong to anybody, but in order to get to there, you've got to cross my land one way or another, or I own the bottom of the river. So it's really tricky, and the riparian laws around it are so complicated. Thank you for the question.
Do you see the Crow Act adding water to the Act at some point in the future?
I laugh a little bit, and thank you very much for the question. The bottom line, I don't actually know the answer to that, and the reason I don't know I don't know because nobody knows, but one of the reasons is I did interview a Labour politician, and what he was very clear about, they certainly weren't going to follow the Scottish model. In terms of changing the Crow Act and water access, and I'm not an expert legally, so I just, in my own opinion, in order to do that, to what extent have they got to change all the riparian laws? And that I don't see mentioned particularly anywhere. I could be a little bit out of date of that. That might have changed this summer, but I haven't. It is about those riparian laws as well. So I don't know how easy it is. So I'm sorry, I've got no answer.
It's not necessarily a question, but it just shows how conferences like Here and Now, we all have our bit to understand the legalities of access, the positives of swimming, how good it is for us, how important it is for children to learn how to swim, how important it is for parents who don't swim to learn how to swim, safety. It's just really nice that everything is coming together.
That's a very nice comment. I don't know if you heard that at the back, but actually it was one line which I missed out of the talk. It's in terms of knowledge, it's not just about getting into the water or enjoying the water. It's all things to do with the water. It's our relationship with the water. It's our relationship with the environment. There's a whole body of different knowledges that we need in order to swim for our own benefit, but the benefit of the natural environment as well. Thank you very much.